What did you think about Julia's? Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our special elections broadcast brought to you by Eyewitness News. It is the final day in terms of counting of results. We are now standing at 99% of the votes counted. We are counting down to 6 p.m. when President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected here at the Elections Operations Center, and the IEC will be finally declaring the results. It's been a long wait, but in summary, two stories have emerged from these elections. One is that we are seeing the decline of the two major parties in South Africa, that is the ANC and the official opposition, the DA. At last count, with 99% of the votes counted, the ANC was at 45.69%. If you remember 2016, they were at 53.9%, which means that they are controlling around 118 councils, still leading in some, but some are still hung. The DA itself is at 21.51%, and they are controlling 11 councils. We will talk about this much later on, but the big story emerging there is that they may have lost more than 400 seats across the country. Then, of course, we'll talk around the EFF, where they've remained fairly steady with a marginal growth. The big winners, of course, are the IFP that are growing, and we are seeing that map in KwaZulu-Natal turning red because their numbers have really increased. They are currently controlling as many as 16 councils. But for now, we are joined by somebody who joined the electoral space under a new hat, but not new to the South African politics. We are joined by Mmusi Maimane, who is the chief activist of One South Africa. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Eyewitness News.
Good afternoon. It's a truly great to be here.
Let's reflect on the process, the election. How have you found this round of elections?
Yeah. We pushed for these elections to take place knowing very well they'd operate within a COVID environment. And I think, to be fair, as far as those processes are concerned, I think the IEC has worked hard to achieve that. Secondly, I think we must all be concerned as South Africans that so many citizens stayed away from home. And thirdly, I think the broader infrastructure of elections, security, policing, all of those things, I think bring something that we should be worried about, in the sense that the arresting of journalists, the harassing of political leaders, that's the securitization of elections, and I think they become very dangerous when the state acts like that. So broadly speaking, I'd say the IEC gets a pass. There are many more areas to improve on, but I do think we need to come back to the genuine political question, which is, I don't think the big political parties were able to enthuse citizens to come back, turn out, and I think we've seen a seismic shift in the electorate in this country.
Did that seismic shift bode well for you, who are saying to South Africans, maybe let's ditch the formal political structures, there are independents, people that you know in the communities, rather opt for them?
Yeah, and we're buoyed about it. So if the independents were a country, we're a party across the country, they'd be the fifth biggest in the country. So so that's a positive result. Secondly, where we worked with independent candidates, we now have seen incredible outcomes in various places. Setsoto, as an example, we got about 20-30% there. When you look at Cedarburg, we'll be able to put an independent mayor on the table there. When you go to Neisner, that council will be able to have significant influence. In Okumkichima, where the stadium was, there's changed. We've got seats all across the country. And our objective was to build the infrastructure across the country, get communities to be dominated by citizens who come from them. And where we chose to participate, we're comfortable to know that we did very well. Now the question is, what does the journey look like towards 2024, and how do we spread that even further across the country?
An interesting point that you're making there, that there was a point in South Africa where that section of other on the leaderboard of elections was fairly tiny, but we are seeing it increasing, but not only increasing, with the hung municipalities now standing at 65, that voice might even become even more influential.
And I think it proves the point. This nonsense that people were spaying out saying, don't waste your vote on small parties, is going to matter now. Because in a council that's hung, every vote counts. And it matters for two areas. The election of the mayor or whoever the executive is, that's going to matter. And secondly, in passing of budgets. Now, when you have to pass a budget in a municipality, the community are at the center of it, because you have to approve the IDP, you have to approve the budget. And if you haven't done that work, I'm of the complete view that the voice of the so-called other, in my instance, the independents, the Section 15As, will matter more than ever before. And now for the first time, you can't just simply keep sewage running down the street and hope the community will now say to that councillor, go vote in support of a budget that doesn't benefit us. Now there's a real demand that can be exercised within the council itself.
And what do we... South Africans still didn't come out to vote.
Yeah.
And that I think is an indictment across all board, or across all of the political parties. Option.
Milestone, Parliament has passed a law about electoral reform that will allow a constituency-based model. I happen to hold the view that all politics is local. All of us are concerned, before we are about, fiscal prudence, we're concerned about whether or not we've got water, we've got electricity, we've got a job, and we feel safe. If those things disappear in the electoral landscape, then I think we can be able to hold people directly accountable. Because part of the frustration why people didn't turn out to vote is because they feel not only is their vote inconsequential, but there's no consequence in this country. In that, we've watched Zondo. The ANC, at a moment where they needed to keep the lights on last week, they couldn't even do that last week. So the lack of consequence across the country, people are feeling it. In the city, we spent a lot of time in rural municipalities. And when you and I complain from urban centers about load shedding, they talk about when is water coming, when is electricity coming. So the lack of consequence. Now, when we can put it in constituencies and enhance accountability, now suddenly people will turn out.
Is financing an issue when you're running as an independent? I mean, just take us through, just quickly, what are the big things that you have learned having moved from a party independence?
Yeah. I think the question of money is always going to be hard because I think you're competing against a big machine. The second is unless you have an umbrella body as one South Africa has given, independents don't sit in the party liaison committees that the IEC sets up. So you find they've got no voice inside the IEC. There's no one who's able to go, is your logo on the ballot, all of those types of things. So I think they are then excluded out of the party liaison bit. But then the last thing is I think their rights need to be protected. So that's for me some of the things that we have to fix. Because as much as we have to show how we finance independence and how we govern that legislatively, we also have to demonstrate what voice they can have in the democratic process in preparation for elections and the subsequent actions that take place from there.
Mmusi, I have to take you back to your recent past, and only because you've become a feature in the conversations of the DA in some of the support that they have lost. I mean, we heard John Steenhuisen, the leader, insinuating that, he had to run an election for a party when the leader had basically jumped ship.
Well, I think that's typical of Mr. Steenhuisen, right? To not take accountability himself, but to point accountability elsewhere. When I was inside the DA, I always argued the case to say, we have to work harder at building a broad coalition of South Africans of different races. He and his current leadership rejected that vision. And the rejection of that vision sent to South Africans to say they become a party that wants to consolidate minorities. Now they've got the results that they deserve, in all fairness, because they can't broaden themselves. They are narrowing. So that's the first outcome. The second is the lack of imagination around addressing the very serious issues that South Africa faces, and sugarcoated by saying it's color blindness is an indicator that you are ignoring the rest of society. But the last question that I have to put, it was he himself who said, when I resign, once you lose seats, you need to leave. He must explain to South Africans what is he going to do after losing 400 seats, because this is at the core of accountability.
But what does it mean for South Africa's politics when you have the official opposition then moving to a very small base and basically support caring more, it felt like, attracting the white community and kind of moving to minority politics?
It's a sad thing, because I think as it's happening on that side, it's also happening on another side, where we're seeing what now typically looks like black parties versus white parties, or religious parties or regional parties. That's dangerous for the center to be able to hold, and for an ability for us to get a consensus as a nation. But it does open up a big opportunity. And one of the lessons I've learned now is that actually we can bring a diverse group of candidates across the country, build a new center that's emerging, and I think that's what will be rewarded heading forward into elections as South Africans are seeking their alternative. So what is the tragedy behind it is that if we don't do anything, if we don't build that center, it honestly will become South Africans being beholden to liberation movements versus race-based organizations. And I don't think that will help us. Otherwise, we might as well suspend elections, just take the census results and say, these are the results for the elections. We have to build that center, and that's what I'm working towards. That's why we've gone out and built one South Africa. That's the objective.
As we conclude, we are seeing 64 hung councils. 2016, we were at 27. There is no good story to tell in those municipalities that were led by coalitions. How do we ensure that can do?
I've been in those negotiations before. You've got to be clear in your head, and what are you negotiating for? Ask the citizens now, and I want to ask every South African to watch what the parties agree on, because sometimes people go negotiate for corner offices. They forget the citizens when they're elected.
Make it public.
You know, and that's what we must demand. We must demand those negotiations. We must demand transparency. It's a flaw of the proportional representative system in some ways that is going to be a problem at national level, is that you kind of divvy up the votes proportionally and then say that's what the outcome is. But frankly, what you need is for people to be able to, if they resign from a party, to be able to keep their seats, because they can then be in that council, in that organization, be willing to go, I will not agree to the principle of what you are saying, and I vote against it, and they must keep their seats. So to me, I think actually the hung council mechanism is a good situation for South Africa. All it will require is strong leadership, and I must be honest, when you have leadership that's willing to work through what needs to happen, transparent with the public, and respectful of coalition partners, coalitions work. I was there. I knew what it took to achieve that. And once you lose that leadership that coalesces with people, you lose the coalition itself.
But having said that, Tshwane had 4 mayors. Nelson Mandela Bay, I've lost count. So, to actually enable a 5-year period where people can actually govern,
I think one of the things that we've got to achieve before we get to the political leadership is the bureaucratic leadership. You know, we talk about state capture at a national level and we forget municipal capture. And the problem with municipal the capture is a story that's not been told. I think it's a Mr. Ngobeni. He has been city manager across metros in Johannesburg. Once a political party captures the state and deploys its own people, that bureaucracy cannot govern regardless of who you put in leadership. So the first job we've got to do is break down the capture. That's why hung councils are good, because you can't buy an entire party. Furthermore from that, the stability of it is brought on by a competent bureaucracy, and then as the citizens simply say, we can trigger a fact that when a party revolves and reneges in its agreements, we must remove them. I'd rather see us in constant by-elections rather than simply allowing this revolving door of mayors. It's got to be back at the citizens.
Is anyone talking to you yet? And are there any conditions from those that want these conditions?
I've opened the administration. Secondly, make sure that citizens and demand what citizens have put is on the table. So we are in the process of negotiating in a few councils at this point in time, and we're clear that the voice of the citizen will matter more than what even my thoughts are or what the political parties want themselves.
All right, thank you very, very much. That was one South Africa's chief activist, Mmusi Maimane, joining us here on Eyewitness News. We are going to be continuing with our special broadcast as we are counting to 6 p.m. when we are expecting the IEC to officially declare the results of the 2021 local government elections.